ora pro nobis peccatoribus nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Oh, hi. Just finishing something up. Welcome to Chicken Philosophy's debut episode of Teilhard de Chardin. Technically Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, but I got in the habit of referring to him as Teilhard de Chardin, although technically it wasn't me. Here with us is Frater BT. You might have seen him before on another program. How's it going, Frater? I'm good. Can't complain. How have you been? I'm good. So when do you recall my birth? You came around toward the end of 2000, the year 2000, in time of my greatest shame, the highest head of the serpent Leviathan. And anyway, so that's how the name Gwydion was given to me. Right. And are you familiar with the works of Teilhard de Chardin? I am. Gordon first introduced me to Teilhard de Chardin sometime around 1998, I believe, which is exactly why I thought it appropriate for this debut episode that you guest host and do the reading. What do you think? I would be glad to, but I do have one condition. You let me wear the hat. All right. Thank you. Let's get started, shall we? Okay, so anyway, sorry, for those who don't know me, you're probably a little confused, but it's okay. Don't worry about it all that much. If you want too much information about all this, then the round table is a good place to check out. But, so yes, we are beginning the Pierre Teilhard de Chardin segment, or portion, or podcast, or something on chicken philosophy. And we will begin by reading The Divine Milieu. But before we do that, I want to actually read the PDF that Gordon gave me back in the 1990s, which first piqued my interest in Teilhard de Chardin to begin with. Excuse me. All right, so this is an article called Cyberspace and the Dream of Teilhard de Chardin by John R. Mabry. And this started circulating back in the AOL days of 1994. And yeah, a lot of us were very kind of starry-eyed about, oh, the internet, what's it going to do? How's it going to change the world? And it is changing the world. It has changed the world in the, almost 30 years since those days. But, not exactly in ways that some of us were imagining it would. Although, I might say that these might be the baby steps on the growing pains toward the Noosphere. What am I talking about? I'll just let John R. Mabry put it in a very concise way, as he did, which got a lot of people excited. Here's the article. Progressive Catholics. No, that's not an oxymoron. There are progressive Catholics, though they're not as progressive as the progressive, Wiccans. Okay, I'll keep reading. Progressive Catholics have long cherished Teilhard de Chardin and his unique and mystical vision. And for those of us who have only recently discovered the new cosmology, his discovery is as great an epiphany as the encountering of Hildegard, Julian of Norwich. Comment below if you get those references, because I, being a bit of an ignoramus in a lot of ways, don't. Or any of the other mystics who testify to divine immanence. That would explain why. Teilhard was a man possessed of rare vision, who was capable of remythologizing his faith to fit the facts, in quotes for some reason, that his scientific studies convinced him of. His was not a God out there, who disapproved of humans hypothesizing about or even tampering with the creation. His God was an organic entity who lived and breathed the life and breath of the creation, a creator who was simultaneously giving birth to and being born from the magnificent organism of the universe. His views are profoundly creation-centered and are worthy of our present consideration, not only because his thought was ahead of its time, but because his predictions, which seemed so unlikely in his own time, are coming to pass unnoticed beneath our very noses. Chardin, sometimes I'll try to pronounce it in French, sometimes I might not. Varying degrees of butchered French is what you're going to hear here, including the title milieu, which I'm sure I'm not saying correctly. Anyway, Chardin was not a psychologist, nor even a philosopher in the usual sense. He was a priest and mystic, but he was also a scientist to whom the concept of evolution held as much weight as scripture. Evolution is the basis for Chardin's entire cosmology, not as Darwinian evolution would have it, a random product or the survival of the fittest, but an evolution planned and guided by divine agency. It appears that Jean Mabry is taking a little bit of what's it called? Intelligent design spin, though I don't think intelligent design was a thing when Chardin was writing, so something to keep in mind. This is how I was introduced to him, but let's let Chardin speak for himself. But nonetheless, I'm going to keep reading. Quote, the magic word, quote within quotes, evolution, end quote within quotes, which haunted my thoughts like a tune, end quote, he writes, quote, was to me the unsatisfied hunger, like a promise held out to me, like a summons to be answered, end quote. Chardin's universe is one of continuous and interwoven evolutionary threads, incorporating plants, animals, the planet, the cosmos, and, most peculiar to him, not merely the physical and mental evolution of humankind, but our spiritual ascent as well. Michael Murray, in The Thought of Teilhard de Chardin, writes, quote, in Teilhard's hands, the theory of evolution, far from diminishing man by relating him to the apes, as so many churchmen used to fear, actually reestablishes him at the moving apex of time-space, well above the fixed central position which he lost in the Copernican revolution, end quote. It speaks for itself, right? I don't need to go into how kind of cool that idea is, do I? Right? So people used to think, because the Garden of Eden is true, literally, then the earth must be the center of the universe and everything goes around it. And then when someone said no, they barbecued him, that kind of thing, or maybe just excommunicated. So people didn't want to lose the importance of mankind. But this is reestablishing in the vast universe of so many galaxies mankind's importance at the moving apex of time-space, kind of disregarding, for those watching some of the other programs on chicken philosophy, this ties in a little bit with some of Ibn Arabi's ideas. But anyway, I'm just going to keep reading. I don't want to be reading this for multiple episodes. I want to get to the book. Anyway, yes. In Teilhard's estimation, humankind is the crowning achievement of the universe because it is in us, and as far as we yet know, only in us, that the creation has become self-aware. Our eyes are the eyes through which the earth finally beholds her own beauty, and, just as importantly, knows that she beholds it. Human beings are not above the creation, but are themselves the creation, that part of the creation that is self-conscious. The evolutionary ascent of human beings occurs, according to Chardin's theory, in two stages of what he calls planetization. This is Teilhard de Chardin writing in like the 1940s or something, right? So it has a sci-fi ring to it, but a lot of the sci-fi that uses these terms came after Teilhard de Chardin, possibly inspired in part by Teilhard de Chardin, or inspired by others who were inspired by Teilhard de Chardin. The first stage is the, quote, go forth and multiply, end quote, stage, in which humanity expanded in both quantity, parentheses, in the very number of persons, end parentheses, and in quality, arguable, but I'll keep reading, parentheses, psychological and spiritual development, end quote. I guess if you look at like the Assyrian Empire and compare it to certain things in modern day, then you can say it's better. But if you compare it to other things in modern day, you can say it's gotten much worse. It just depends on where you look, right? I mean, you know, what aspect of humanity you look at, not like which groups of humans. Just to be clear, that's not what I'm saying. Anyway, all right. As Blanche Marie Gallagher, BVM, I know not what BVM stands for, explains in her introduction to her Meditations with Teilhard de Chardin, quote, during the long period of expansion, physical and cultural differences isolated the century. What? Isolated the peoples of the earth, I skipped a whole line, from each other as they spread to fill the earth. At the beginning of our present century, with most of the habitable surface of the earth occupied, the races began to converge. Her words, ethnicities or cultures, would be more appropriate since races can't, like, for example, have children together. Like, you know, zebras can't have children with alligators because they're different races, right? Anyway, what's the word? Colloquial usage of the word as opposed to actual definition. Through technology, tangential energy becomes evident in the response of the people across the earth to each other. People are sharing their wars, aren't they, though? Their coronations, their concerns. Thus, the law of complexity consciousness develops, end quote. We have reached the end of the expanding or, quote, diversity, end quote, stage, and are now entering the contracting or, quote, unifying, end quote, stage. A little controversial, maybe, for some. I mean, what that unifying stage looks like will vary from imaginer to imaginer. Some imagining like the United Colors of Benetton ads with everybody holding hands and unity and diversity and multiculturalism, that kind of thing. And then others are imagining, that one group will take over and make everybody, exactly like that group. And we've seen that happen once or twice in varying degrees. And so now we all have certain things in common across most of the world. But anyway, I'll keep reading. At this point, Chardin's theory, it's nice to, I mean, this is one of those things that when you're looking at this from an ideological, just kind of staying in the astral, staying in Hod, staying in Yesod kind of area, that, this is, especially if it's 1994 or 1998 and you're considering these ideas, then it's like, yeah, ooh. And then, but then when you bring it down to earth, it kind of, every line has a different ring to it if you're coming from the standpoint of like, suspiciously interpreting these words from the standpoint of a very down-to-earth, realist kind of position. So anyway, I'm just going to read it and probably bounce back and forth between these viewpoints. At this point, Chardin's theory runs completely counter to Darwin's, does it? In that the success of humanity's evolution in the second stage will not be determined by, quote, survival of the fittest, end quote, but by our capacity to converge and unify. I think it's a little bit of an oversimplification of Darwin, and our ability to converge and unify in this case would make us fit. So it's not actually different. Anyway, the most important initial evolutionary leap, I mean, by oversimplifying, like if a bird does well in the water and then the waters rise, then other birds that don't do well in the water might die out, but the bird that does well in the water will survive. It's not always a matter of who can bite the neck of the other one and in a bloody battle, emerge triumphant as the fittest, as in most fit, as it goes to the gym and shit. Looks like a Marvel superhero, right? That's what basically one example of what I mean by oversimplifying Darwin. Implied in that is like, no, you don't have to be fit and fight each other. You have to be unfit and unify and compromise? No, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? If somebody knows, they should fucking tell everybody, right? Anyway, I mean, a lot of people think they know and are trying to tell everybody. That's kind of part of the problem. All right, where are we? Yes, the most important initial evolutionary leap of the convergence stage is the formation of what Chardin termed the Noosphere. Okay, if you're watching this, obviously if you're hearing this, you didn't just see me point to the screen and didn't see an image appear, but I'll work that image somewhere into the thumbnail. Well, anyway, that's a little piece of my old artwork that was on the old GeoCities page, Hermetic Art. Basically, it's the purple of Yesod as a grid that hovers over. It's a spherical grid hovering over another sphere, which is the colors of Malkut, and the whole thing is like a sphere. And so the Noosphere, it says the Noosphere. That's the title of it, inspired by these ideas. All right, I'll just keep reading. Yes. Its formation, as Michael Murray explains, begins with, quote, a global network of trade, communications, accumulation, and exchange of knowledge, cooperative research, all go into the weaving of the material support for a sphere of collective thought. I know, it sounds a little like the Borg, but it's okay. It's okay. People in the 90s were trying to grapple with these ideas, and the worst case scenario looked like the Borg. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, and they're like, what is that, a Swedish thing? I've been to IKEA. You're very young. You should watch Star Trek: The Next Generation. I know. For you, it's retro. For me, it's new. I know. For me, the retro one is the William Shatner one, and the new one is the Picard one. Yeah. Okay. Gen X, I admit it. Don't call me boomer. I'm a couple decades away from being a boomer. Anyway, but I'll wear Gen X with pride. Not quite a millennial. I'm a little old to be a millennial. They call us a zennial, right on the border, but I'm definitely toward the end of Gen X. Yeah, you don't need to know all this. This isn't what you came here for. Is it? Or is it? I don't know. Okay. Yes. So, in the field of science alone, no individual knows more than a tiny fraction of the sum of scientific knowledge. And each scientist is dependent not only for his education, but for all his subsequent work on the traditions and resources which are the collective possession of an entire international society composed of the living and the dead. Side note, I think the fact that there's so many like flat earther type, Bill Gates vaccine, all this stuff. Not that there isn't shady shit going on in the world of, pharmaceutical companies and stuff like that, because there is. But the point I'm making is that there's a lot of individuals who I don't think are comfortable with the idea of only possessing a tiny fraction. I mean, even if, like this is saying, even if they were a trained scientist who had specialized in some area of science for many, 8 to 10 years in college and had become a professional scientist, they, even then, would only know a tiny fraction of what there is that is known or what there is that is understood and, there isn't like a hard knowledge in the scientific community, but there's consensus agreed upon. This is how it is until something comes up that tells us otherwise. There's things that are pretty much basically 100% known, but it's really more like 99.999999996. You know what I mean? But basically, for all intents and purposes, it's 100%. You know what I mean? Things like evolution, things like, that. Things like fossils not having been put here, 6,000 years ago to fool people into doubting the literal interpretation of the King James Version of the Bible. Things like that. I agree with the Catholics. Don't let them read the Bible. It'll freak them out. I'm just kidding. But they did have a point, though. You got to admit, right? If not, check out Dan Harmon's Prophets of Doom. I think it's episode 37 of Hardcore History. And you see what happened when the side effect of people being able, just people, anybody, a random person being able to read the Bible, what that looked like. All right, anyway. This is another one of those where it's like, okay, I think for some people will find it easier to digest the Meccan Revelations segment on here than it will be to digest some of this. I'm picking kind of the coolest people that I'm aware of in these egregores, in these groupthinks, in order to not like to be an apologist for the groupthink, but just to point out that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater if you are just refuse to hear anything that has any buzzword related to these groupthinks of billions of people. So you got a couple billion people over there that follow Muhammad. You got a couple billion, maybe a billion or less people over here that follow the Pope. One is organized and has a hierarchical structure, and the other one isn't, or is less so, or has multiple different types. So it's kind of easier, I think, for that reason to completely condemn one and be open-minded about the other. One is familiar and one is less familiar, so one can tend to be open to the ideas of the unfamiliar before the familiar. I'm talking to certain people who probably aren't watching this. There's maybe some people watching this that are like totally coming from a totally different demographic than I'm even comfortable with, and that's okay. You're welcome here if you like it, if you're curious about what's going on. All right, let's see if I can actually get through this PDF. The idea, Chardin writes, did I even get that far? Yes. Just as Earth once covered itself with a film of interdependent living organisms, which we call the biosphere, so mankind's combined achievements are forming a global network of collective mind. End quote. Quote, the idea, end quote, writes Chardin, quote, is that the Earth is not only covered by myriads of grains of thought, but enclosed in a single thinking envelope, unnecessary French pronunciation, sorry, so as to form a single vast grain of thought on the sidereal scale, the plurality of individual reflections grouping themselves together and reinforcing one another in the act of a single unanimous reflection, end quote. One hesitates to invoke the terms, quote, group mind, end quote, yeah, for good reason, but that is the actual literal definition of egregore, and it is kind of what we're talking about, and whether people are comfortable with the idea of group mind or not, it's a thing. If while you're thinking to yourself, oh, what would those people think if they knew I was thinking that? I shouldn't think that way, I should think this other way. Then you are a part of one. And you get to decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or if the words good and bad don't really apply here, or if it's just a human thing. We're social animals in various ways. There's things that happen when you isolate yourself. There's things that happen when you plunge yourself into social media, and there's things that happen when you walk around shaking people's hand and looking them in the eye and having conversations with them, and they're three different things. So try, if you're only doing one of those things, maybe try one of the other two. Maybe if you want to. It's up to you. It's just my advice. Just, take it for what it's worth. I don't know what it's worth. I mean, I think I know what it's worth, but I'm going to reserve my opinion about what it's worth and let you have yours. Because I'm so nice. Anyway, yes. Thinking envelope, sidereal scale, yes. The plurality of individual reflections grouping themselves together and reinforcing one another in the act of a single unanimous reflection, end quote. I recommend, if you're into it, Taco. Is it here? Yeah, Taco. It's a book. I mean, and Iburrito. If you like Taco, you'll like Iburrito. And check out the haikus, specifically because I was working in the entertainment industry from 2006 to 2014. And given the way that it's taken for granted that the media is, or Hollywood is today, I would invite you to take a look at a time when we in the entertainment industry were longing and shouting and really pushing for people to fucking stop making everything so damn white heteronormative, And because it was, and it was still continued to be, and then, it still is behind, the actors are diverse, but the people behind the scenes usually aren't. The PWD, persons with disability, were starting to I was going to say march, but, like some of them, but to protest and demand parts in movies, especially rather than hiring a person who's not in a wheelchair and having him sit in a wheelchair because the character's in a wheelchair, why not hire an actor who is in a wheelchair? Things like that. Everybody was so upset, so make this happen. And now it's happening. And so this feeling, the heart of these poems is able to look at it and go, it's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was 20 years ago. And then all these people on the internet are like, this is terrible, the woke man, blah, blah, blah. Fuck you. Sorry, but fuck you. You're wrong. You're wrong. Okay, maybe the pendulum has swung too far the other direction, and maybe a lot of people are being disingenuous about it and just doing it because they think they should or they think they have to. But God damn it, that's a hell of a lot better than it was before, there was a point where every town in the South, in the 1890s, had a black mayor, and people were really upset because they're like, God damn it, 30 years ago these people were our slaves and now they're our mayor? Fuck this. And they put on white hoods and they marched. That's the anti-woke people today. That's all I'm saying. It's an equivalent. I'm just putting it out there. You might think I'm wrong, and if you do, you're wrong. It's simple. It's basic math. Anyway, now that I've alienated half or more of my viewers, you have to be a more progressive Catholic than that. That's what I'm saying. No. Okay, where was I? You know what? This is going to end up being very long if I insist on reading the whole thing in the first episode. So the way that it's going to be is the first couple of episodes are going to be this PDF document, and then after that we can jump into the divine milieu. I'll read a little bit more, and I'll play the music I was going to start playing when we actually got to the divine milieu. This is a little bit longer than I realized, and I had a little bit more to say than I was expecting. And it's interesting, isn't it, that with the hat combined with the there's some kind of BT Gwydion crossover hybrid thing happening. I think the blue hat made it possible because obviously with the red hat this would have looked ridiculous. So they've become compatible. And if you didn't notice before, Gwydion's new jacket is actually the inner robe of BT. So something's happening. I don't know exactly what. In retrospect, later, 10 years from now, I'll analyze it and be like, oh, this is the period when the Gwydion consciousness and the BT consciousness were doing something. I don't know. But anyway, here we go. Libera. Can you hear it? Is it too quiet? Just a little bit. All right. I'll read a little more. of this old PDF. Yes, one hesitates to invoke the terms group mind or hive mentality, but they are perhaps leaps made by far less developed creatures than we that presage our own ascent. All right. So we're arguing for hive mind. Just so you know where you are. That's what's happening here. Let's take a different look at the Borg. Maybe the Borg are onto something, Just so you can see, if you've got a Bible around and you haven't read it, just skip to the very last chapter, Revelation 22. You'll know what we're talking about. It's the Borg, but gold and with rivers and shit. All right. I thought that I knew which track this was going to be, but it's not. Let's try a different one. That one was just a little too. Okay, hive mind. Yes. Yeah, that's nice. We know that such a thing can and does exist in a variety of species, especially ants. Migratory birds and others. You should have led with migratory birds. Come on, if you're trying to talk people into this, don't call them ants. Silly. We also know the evidence regarding the, quote, 100th monkey, end quote. Do we? Parentheses, once a learned behavior is taught to a significant portion of the population, in this famous example of monkeys, the behavior becomes instinctual, even for those completely isolated from the community which acquired the behavior, end quote. I mean, maybe. If C.G. Jung has given us the notion of the collective unconscious, Chardin then speaks of the collective conscious, according to John R. Mabry. I'll read a little more. Chardin waxes poetic, as he often does, when he describes it, quote, Noosphere, the living membrane, which is stretched like a film over the lustrous surface of the star which holds us, an ultimate envelope taking on its own individuality and gradually detaching itself like a luminous aura. This envelope was not only conscious but thinking, the very soul of the earth, end quote. Not only are our bodies the stuff of the earth's body, but our minds are the consciousness of this being, the earth. We have supposed that we are individuals, yet we, quote, are dust, and to dust ye shall return, end quote. We have supposed our minds are our own, that even if the earth is conscious of herself in us, she is conscious of being many little selves, but perhaps, as theorists in the field of transpersonal psychology suggest, we are mistaken. Chardin, in fact, argues that it must be so, that, quote, what we are aware of is only the nucleus, which is ourselves. The interaction of souls would be incomprehensible if some aura did not from one to another something proper. What? Did not extend from one to another something proper to each one and common to us all. Wow, Chardin says if some aura did not extend from one to the other. He was a little controversial, by the way, in the Catholic Church, in the Vatican I Catholic Church that he was living during. They sent him to China, which is how I thought maybe he knew my grandpa. They both spoke French. China's a big place, I know, but Chardin believes, too, that this unconsciousness is not only psychological, but of the greatest spiritual importance as well. Quote, nothing is precious, end quote, he says, quote, except that part of you which is in other people, and that part of others which is in you. Up there on high, everything is one, end quote. I mean, that's a statement. Nothing is precious except for that which in you is in common with others. I mean, okay, on one level, On another level, I'm like, but on one level, I'm like, all right. I mean, if you're talking about like the soul, the God within, the consciousness, that thing, that ineffable thing itself that makes us what we are. If we were a bunch of robots walking around, reposting memes, I could see an argument that that's not precious. I mean, it's precious like robots going around reposting memes might be precious. People who like to play with little dolls and stuff, dolls walking around bumping into each other. It's precious in its own way, but not in the way that he means, I would venture to say. The noosphere is a fascinating and intriguing idea, one that many of us desperately want. And at the time that I read this, I wanted it, and that was what... I mean, not that I wanted a hive mind, but I was into this idea of the mind of the earth, I'll keep reading. The noosphere is a fascinating and intriguing idea, one that many of us desperately want on some level to be true. But as we have been describing it thus far, it seems little more than science fiction. How is it that such an awesome phenomenon could possibly come to be? Amazingly, Teilhard predicts the evolution of a machine that hardly even existed in his time beyond being a glorified abacus, the computer. Quote, "Here I am thinking," end quote, he writes in Man's Place in Nature, quote, "of those astonishing electronic machines," parentheses, "the starting point and hope of the young science of cybernetics," end parentheses, "by which our mental capacity to calculate and combine is reinforced and multiplied by a process and to a degree that herald as astonishing advances in this direction as those that optical science has already produced for our power of vision." End quote. Teilhard's vision of what computers would do for us is twofold. First, computers will achieve the completion of our brains. I'm not that into this track. One sec. Come on. All right. It's interesting, though, isn't it? All right. This is kind of an overview. Someone who read books about Teilhard de Chardin writing an article for a magazine. Well, anyway, and then later we're going to read The Divine Milieu, which is a specific book, which we'll get to later. Here's an interesting thing. In that there would be the instantaneous retrieval of information around the globe. Second, computers will improve our brains by facilitating processes more quickly than our own resources can achieve them. I'm thinking of AI. I mean, obviously there's a backlash reaction, especially among artists right now, to the fact that you can just write in The Last Supper, but everybody's a lizard, whatever. And it just boing. All right. It is also interesting that Chardin predicts... Wait, did I read that? Yeah. It is also interesting that Chardin predicts the use of the prefix cyber in regards to the computer-human matrix, since cyber is all the rage in computering circles. Again, 1994, different time. In fact, what can be seen as the progenitor of Teilhard's noosphere is now being termed cyberspace by the computer press in reference to that mystical field of interconnecting computer pathways wherein all of the exchanges are made. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close there. I'll make a little mark so that I know where I left off, so that I don't waste too much time trying to figure it out. Next time on the Teilhard de Chardin portion of Chicken Philosophy. Thank you for joining me. It's been an honor to guest host in Gwydion's place, and perhaps you'll see me again. I don't know. We'll have to talk to Gwydion about that. But until next time, as always, I bid you
Buckaroo!